Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab rahimahullah ta'ala, and we've been going through the types of shirk and the chapters with the types of shirk that the Shaykh rahimahullah has been going through, and now we move on to Babun min ash-shirki an yustaghatha bi ghayri Allah wa yad'u ghayrah. Chapter that from shirk is to seek help from other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or to call upon other than him. And the Shaykh rahimahullah, he starts with the ayah and the qawl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa qawlihi ta'ala, وَلَا تَدْعُوا مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَنفَعُكَ وَلَا يَضُرُّكَ فَإِن فَعَلْتَ فَإِنَّكَ إِذًا مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, do not call upon other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that which does not help you, or that which does not benefit you nor harm you. And if you do that, then certainly you are from the unjust, from the oppressors. And what is meant by oppression here is the dhulm that happens is shirk. That shirk is the biggest type of oppression in Islam, because it is oppression and is being unjust with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as you are taking a right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is you worshipping him, and giving it to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this shows that calling to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and asking for help from other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a type of shirk. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah, he forbids it, clearly forbids it. And that if a person does this and he calls to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he's from the mushrikeen and he's from the zalimin, those who oppress Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it links to the book, and it links to the book of Tawheed, as it shows that calling upon other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one of the things that nullifies Tawheed, that it takes the Tawheed away, because it is shirk. And what we can benefit from this one specific ayah, as we have said, is that dua to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is major shirk. A shirk that takes you out of the fold of Islam, major shirk. And that even, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this, he's speaking to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that even if the best of creation, the most righteous from you, calls other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even him will become from the mushrikeen. Even him will become from the zalimin. So what about those who are not on the same level as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And many of these people, you see them, they call other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're sinning, this major sins, bid'ah, and they call other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If the most righteous from you would be from the mushrikeen, how about these people? And it also shows the weakness of these gods and these idols that they worship. That these idols and these gods, they can't benefit nor can they harm. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can. And as they can't harm nor benefit, the dua to them becomes pointless. It becomes batil, false. There's no point to it, because they can't help you in the end. Then the Shaykh rahimahullah, he goes on and he says, وَقَوْلِهِ وَإِن يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ وَإِن يُرِدَكَ بِخَيْرٍ فَلَا رَادَ لِفَضْلِهِ يُصِيبُ بِهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ وَهُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, and if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if Allah touches you with harm, meaning he brings harm to you, nobody can undo that except him. And if he wants good for you, none can repel his favor, push away his favor. That thing that he gives you, that good that he gives you, nobody can push it away. And he causes it, he says he causes it to reach whomever of his slaves. That any one of his servants, any one of his slaves, if he intends good for them and he wants good for them, it will reach them. And if he wants bad for them, it will reach them. And he is the forgiving, he is the merciful. But even then, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if he puts upon you harm, he is the most forgiving. And he is the most merciful. That harm that you believe may be from mercy. And if he wants good for you, this is clear. It's good for you, and this is from his mercy as well. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he shows us that if he wants harm to come to you, it will come to you. And if he wants good to come to you, it will come to you in whatever way he wills. And in the end, whatever way it comes to you, it will eventually get to you. And for example, death. If it's your time to die, if it's your time to go, then there is no way that won't get to you. For example, some people, if someone goes out and he gets into a car accident and he passes away, they'll say if he never took that certain route, he would never have died. Or if he did not get into the car, he wouldn't have died. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if he willed for him to go, he would have went. He would have hit his head at home. He would have fell down the stairs. He would have died in his sleep. Eventually he was going to go. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he shows us, and even if it is good, if for example you made or you got £1 million, whatever way you got that £1 million, there was another way to it. If it wasn't that you worked for it, somebody would have gave it to you. In every single different way, that £1 million was coming to you. And this is, subhanAllah, it shows us that we leave things to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is the most wise. If he wants something good for you, it will come to you. And if he wants something bad for you, it will come to you in whatever way that he subhanahu wa ta'ala wills. And this shows that you should only make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because he is the one who benefits. He is the one who harms. So if you make dua to him, then he will benefit you, or he will harm you, or he'll take away that harm. And subhanallah, this shows that having Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah is a part, or Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, the oneness of lordship, comes under the oneness of worship. Because if you have the oneness of lordship, or if you have the oneness of worship, and you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, then that means you believe that it is him alone that can help you, him alone that can harm you. So Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, the oneness of worship, it comes under Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah.
You say if he is the one to be worshipped, then he's the one who deserves.
Exactly. So if you worship him alone, then he is deserving, or you worship him alone. Why? Because he is the most powerful. He is the one who harms. And if he is the only one who harms, and he is the only one who benefits, then he is the only one worthy of worship. They're both connected together. Subhanallah. And it also shows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has a will. Some people, they disbelieve in this will. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a will. If he wills good for you, it comes to you. If he wills bad for you, it comes to you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can will bad, and he can will good. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most wise. Why he does this, we do not know. Lakin, he has hikmah. He has wisdom in this, in every single act. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has mercy. If he gives you something bad, that may be a mercy from him. Maybe there was something even worse in the future. And if he gives you something good, that is mercy from him. because that good thing has came to you rather than it being a bad thing. And then the Shaykh rahimahullah, he moves on to the ayah, وَقَوْلِهِ فَابْتَغُوا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الرِّزْقَ وَاعْبُدُوهُ وَاشْكُرُوا لَهُ إِلَيْهِ تُرْجَعُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, so ask Allah for provision, for rizq, meaning wealth and other things like that, children, and worship Him and thank Him, and to Him you return. And it shows that a person, he must ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for provision, for rizq, whether that is wealth, whether that is a job, whether that is money, whether that is children. He should only go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask Him for that. Rizq is only asked from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a person, once he has this rizq and he sees the ni'am, he sees the blessing, he should worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this. The asl is he worships Him before this, so he is able to gain the rizq. And then after it has came to him, he thanks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed him. So a person, he should thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everything that comes to him. His eyesight, his ability to walk, that he's here in the masjid, that he can read, that he can write. Subhanallah, a lot of people, they become depressed in life. Like if they took a piece of paper and they started writing down all the points or all the blessings that they have. They can see, they have water, they have a house, they have a masjid near to them, they have brothers in the community. Yani very small things. They have socks, some people don't have socks. They have clothes, some people don't have clothes. They have shoes, some people don't have shoes. Subhanallah, the blessings, they go on and on and on and on. If a person does this and he thanks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it, he won't be depressed anymore. Like subhanallah, what we do now is we take a piece of paper and we start writing down everything that is bad. Rather than writing down the blessings, we write down, what's this? I have to pay this, I have to pay that, I have to do this, I have to do that. Like subhanallah, we don't understand the blessings. And subhanallah, what we see from this is that if you have tawheed, if you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and you worship Him alone, and you believe in His names and His attributes, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will both bless you in the dunya by giving you rizq, and He will bless you in the akhirah by giving you Jannah. Subhanallah. Have tawheed and you will get both. Not just the akhirah. Some people, or if you come to the masjid and you pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, call upon Him, you're only going to get the akhirah. People say, no, I want now. Subhanallah, the nafs, the hawa. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells you, call upon Him for this, He will give it you now. Subhanallah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the Shaykh rahimahullah, he says, وَقَوْلِهِ وَمَنْ أَضَلُّ مِمَّنْ يَدْعُو مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ مَنْ لَا يَسْتَجِيبُ لَهُ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ وَهُمْ عَنْ دُعَائِهِمْ غَافِلُونَ وَإِذَا حُشِرَ النَّاسُ كَانُوا لَهُمْ أَعْدَاءً وَكَانُوا بِعِبَادَتِهِمْ كَافِرِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, and who is more misguided than the one who calls to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? They do not answer. Subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, they do not answer until the day of judgment. It does not mean that they are going to answer on the day of judgment. Like, it shows that throughout all of life, they won't answer you, however many times you call them. And if the people, and they are blind to their du'as, that they make this du'a to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they do not know this fact that it's not getting accepted. They believe that it might get accepted, but no. And then in the ayah after that, He says, and if the people are resurrected on the day of judgment, they come back to life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings them back to life. They were to them enemies, meaning these people and these idols that they worshipped, they are their enemies on the day of judgment. They go against them. And they disbelieved in being worshipped. That these idols and these people, they say, I did not want to be worshipped. I did not want to be worshipped. It's just as shaitan, or just as Iblis on the day of judgment, when the people say he is the one who caused me to do this, he'll say, I didn't force you to do it. You did it upon yourself. And these idols, they are innocent as well. They say, I did not ask you to worship me. Like in these people, they worship them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He clearly states that the most misguided of the people are those who call other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. SubhanAllah, if you think about this, if you had one person who was calling other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you had a murderer, or you had someone that did zina, like in this person, he called other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this person that does these sins, you see someone on the street smoking, drinking, you say that person is misguided. A lot of people, this person that calls other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they don't really think much of him. Like if that person, he had Tawheed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, there's nobody more misguided than that person who calls other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That mushrik, that person who disbelieves in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and associates partners with him, he is the most guided of the people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us that on this day, these people will be brought back. These people that called other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they will be alone in the shirk. That even those who they called upon will be innocent from them. So what we see from this is that dua is ibadah, is worship, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that those people or the gods that they worship will be innocent from them. They will say, I did not want your worship. And before that, He talks about the people who call to them. So it means that this calling was a type of worship. For the dua is ibadah. Dua is worship. And worship should be only done to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that, if a person he calls to these idols in the dunya, it won't even be accepted in the dunya. They won't get the dunya, nor will they get the akhirah. Because in this dunya, those idols that they worship, they can't answer to them. They can't give them the dunya. And in the akhirah, they are kafirin, they are mushrikeen. So they go to the hellfire. And then the Shaykh rahimahullah, and this is the last of the ayahs that he uses, and he says, وَقَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ وَيَجْعَلُكُمْ خُلَفَاءَ الْأَرْضِ أَإِلَهٌ مَعَ اللَّهِ قَلِيلًا مَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, who is that who answers the needy being those who have been affected by something, they are harmed. Who is that who calls, who answers the needy if he calls, and he undoes the harm done to him, or the evil that has came to him, he gets rid of it. And he makes the rulers, or he makes you the rulers on this land. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He questions, is there a God with Allah? Saying this to the mushrikeen. Is there a God with Allah? Little do they remember. Little do they remember, meaning that they do not remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His blessing and His greatness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who you call. When you are in help, when you need help, when you are harmed by something, you call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanallah, we even see this in the kuffar. When they're in a plane crash, the first thing that they do, what do they say? They say, oh my God. Or they say, God help me. Or people, they start praying. Even the kuffar, the atheists, they do not believe in a God. That's the first thing they go to. Why? Because they know in that time of stress, in that time of anguish, that time when they know they're close to death, the fitrah, it comes out. That they have to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He shows different things. That He answers the needy. And He takes away the harm. And He makes you rulers upon the land, big things. And these are specific only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing how powerful He is. And this is specific to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what we gain from this is that other gods other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they can't do nothing. Or things that are worshipped, they can't do anything. Because even the kuffar, they go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He puts down and He clearly shows us what He gives to you if you call upon Him. Lakin other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can't do this. This is specific to only Allah Azza wa Jal. And that the mushrikun, some of the mushrikun, they have Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. They believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they go back to Him. Lakin they call other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. And they commit shirk. And that is clear to see only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of these things. And what Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah is and why it has Tawheed al-Rububiyyah is as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one capable of this. He is the only one who should be worshipped. And then the Shaykh rahimahullah, he ends and he says, وَرَوَى الطَّبَرَانِيُّ بِإِسْنَادِهِ. That the Tabarani, he narrated with his chain. What is meant by with his chain means that it goes back to Ubadata ibn al-Samit radiyallahu anhu, one of the Sahaba. This chain of the Tabarani, it goes back to Ubadata ibn al-Samit radiyallahu anhu. And then in the hadith it says أنه كان في زمن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم منافق يؤذي المؤمنين فقال بعضهم قوموا بنا نستغيث برسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من هذا المنافق فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إنه لا يستغاث بي وإنما يستغاث بالله. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, or the Sahabi Ubadah ibn al-Samit, he narrates that they were there at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and there was a hypocrite who used to harm the Muslims or harm the believers. So some of the believers, bear in mind this is the Sahaba, they said, let's seek help from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, or call upon the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. This is the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam when he's alive. And they said, let's call for help from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam against this mushrik, or against this munafiq, against this hypocrite. So the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, help is not called from me, rather it is called from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And subhanallah, at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they were against the kuffar, like we are now, lakin the kuffar were against them. And as Islam was getting stronger and stronger, it was harder for the kuffar to break in. So what did they do? They came from inside. They showed their beliefs as a Muslim, and they used to say things and do things that are against Islam. And these are the munafiqs, the hypocrites. So the mu'mineen, they saw this and they needed help. So they went to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he could have called to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and stopped this munafiq. Lakin from his wisdom and the wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him, he stopped the way to shirk. Because from the hikam and the wisdoms of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that he stopped any way to shirk. Just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he mentions zina, he doesn't say لا تفعلوا الزنا. He says ولا تقربوا الزنا. Do not even come close to zina. Why? To stop the way to eventually zina. And it's the same thing with shirk. Now, to stop that way, or to stop the harm before it happens. To stop the shirk before it happens. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that I am not called upon, rather than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is called upon. And this shows that that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he acknowledges that it is not him that is called upon, rather than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in the end, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he can't harm or benefit. And this is at the time of the Sahaba when he was alive. This is Sahaba. So what about the people now? They call upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he's dead. He's not alive. He's not there anymore, but he's dead. And they call upon him. And some people think this is right. Like at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he stopped this calling upon. But now, while he's dead, people still called upon him. And subhanAllah, there's jahl, there's ignorance. If the people knew these ahadith, no chance they would call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He makes some people blind, and He makes their hearts blind. And even if they see these ahadith, they will not choose to believe. And subhanAllah, this is from the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what we gain from this chapter is that it is not called upon other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if it is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the most righteous of the people. You do not call upon him. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who harms, and He's the only one who benefits. And He is the only one worthy of calling upon. And in the next chapter is Babu qawlillahi ta'ala ayushrikuna ma la yakhluqu shay'an wa hum yukhlaqun. Wa alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa la yastati'una lahum nasran wa la anfusahum yansurun. And we will go on to that in the next episode بإذن الله. هذا وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.